This is the Learning Disabilities Timeline in History. Learning disability, what is it? It is a group of neurological conditions that interfere with a person's way of learning. There's an umbrella of disorders in LD that relate to many things like a student's listening, their speaking capabilities, their reasoning, their ability to read, and mathematical calculation. This is the Learning Disabilities Timeline. There are many things that range from the year 1940 to the year 2000. There are a lot of key things that were mentioned in this book, but a lot of things happened in order for special education students to get to the point that we're at today. There were 5 main leaders in the field of learning, and those contributors were Samuel Orton, Anna Gillingham, Bessie Stillman, Romalda Spalding, and Grace Fernald. What they did was they were able to develop alternative methods to learning disabilities. They created special classroom for those students, and they recognized that students who were thought to be slow learners, or if they had a learning disability. Public Law 94 to 142 in Section 504. What are those things? So the public law is actually known now as IDEA. It is the most significant event of the 1970s, also known as the Education of All Handicapped Children Act. All handicapped children ages 3 to 23 will receive a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment possible. This became known as the mainstreaming law. And Section 504, in my own experience, I've come to notice that Section 504 is actually, in some sense, a watered-down IEP, and it's just as important as an IEP, but it's to fit a standard profile of a particular student so they can receive additional services, accommodations medically, things like that. Casual factors and incident factors. So casual factors, it's not uncommon that several members of the same family have the same condition. A learning disability can actually be inherited. There are many factors that lead to this. Difficult pregnancy, bad delivery, things like that can lead to the incidence of learning disabilities. And then incident factors are are said that how many people are actually known for having a learning disability. Nobody really knows in the sense of like the entire world. There are many estimates made from 5 to 30 to who knows to what percent, but it's all dependent on who is not only tested, but who is then accounted for number-wise. The primary characteristics of LD. So there are perceptual deficits. Perceptual deficits are the brain misinterprets sensory information, reading difficulties, so difficulties learning to read, actually the lack of interactive communication can be a cause of this. And then phonological processing is our awareness or ability to tease out sounds within words, learn symbols of the language, recall sounds quickly, generalize info in a variety of like oral, written, and reading ways. And fun fact, 80% of students in LD actually have problems with their reading. The 3 co-occurring conditions. So those 3 would be ADHD, conduct disorder, and Tourette syndrome. So ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It occurs in approximately 1 out of every 3 individuals who are identified for special ed services. Many symptoms of this are distractibility, impulsivity, inability to complete a routine, blurting, low frustration. They just have short fuse and they overreact to things. And then conduct disorder is actually, it's co-occurring with ADHD, of course, and it is on top of being inattentive and impulsive. A lot of these children have respect for the rights of have a lack of respect of the rights for others. So there might be some cruelty to others or animals, some lying. They're pretty much the rebels of the group. And then Tourette syndrome is inherited. It's a neurological disorder. This condition is characterized by involuntary motor tics or vocal tics. They begin in early childhood and increase in adolescence. It occurs in about 1 out of 1,000 children, and it's more often found in boys. Some programs and settings in the least restrictive environment. So this would be for LD students. There are secondary schools, special education and inclusion classrooms found all all over the place. Special residential schools that they could go to. In college and universities, they have things like ebooks or accommodations. I know that even in college level, there is still the 504 for some students. There are other services like special placement in classrooms, and there are parts on your student's IEP that are determined for their services as well. And then this is just a little picture of me working with some of my kids in my class. Part 2, the learning disabilities, their attributes. So there's a lot of anatomy and function of the brain that needs to be talked about. There is the CNS, the central nervous system, which is responsible for learning. There are 4 lobes to the brain that are important: the frontal, the temporal, the occipital, and the parietal. There are 2 hemispheres, the brainstem, of course, and the cerebral cortex, all labeled right there in that little diagram. The implications on brain injury on learning. So there are brain injuries that can be caused by many different things, such as car accidents, falls, sports-related. Your learning and your behavior are both affected from your brain injuries. There are things called the TBI, which are the traumatic brain injury. And it depends on the injury if it will affect the child based on many factors, which include like the location of the inner injury and the extent of that injury. Autism and the brain. So autism is something that is strongly heritable, which means it follows a genetic pathway. There's research that shows there are structural differences in the brains of children with autism. The same cerebral areas that become reduced in children with autism may also play a large role in society and social defects, cognitive defects, and motor problems. ADHD in the brain. So if you look down here at this fancy little diagram, it shows you typically want your frontal lobe to be a more active area, but in ADHD, that's the lobe that is the least active. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's one of the few learning disabilities that has a distinct link to an environmental toxin. So many ADHD symptoms are caused by the brain's inconsistent processing. Biochemical influences on learning of a child. There are many medicines that can help learning disabilities that people have. The medicines are stimulants that have shown to help certain learning disabilities. Some of the learning disabilities are believed to be caused by biochemical irregularities. Our bodies and brains are all the way to the cellular level are influenced by the stimulants. Research focused around our memory. So our memories are there for us to store our information. So the chemical messages communicated change when the memory is stored. So in order for students to learn, they must be able to attend to the stimuli, encode information about that stimuli, integrate and store data in the memory, be able to receive the data as they are needed. Typically, students with learning disabilities have an issue with one or more of those previously listed things. Research focused on metacognition. So metacognition is the knowledge and the control individuals have over their thinking and their learning. Teachers and parents of students are encouraged to teach the children various strategies that they may use in order for them to learn new information or processes. Different techniques to teach could be story maps, world maps, diagrams, charts, pictures, you name it. Anything that could really allow for that information to be processed. Phonological processing problems. So phonological processing can be first seen as the problem with delayed speech. These processing problems may cause children to have trouble consistently spelling words correctly. It's in your left temporal lobe of your brain. Children with these types of problems may also have trouble following oral directions given to them. So you might have to repeat yourself, as well as reading aloud in class is a struggle for them. So learning disabilities and the law of it. So this is the timeline of the laws. taken literally right from the book. So the education of all handicapped children was in 1975. The IDEA was in 1990 to 2000, Section 504, and No Child Left Behind in the 2000s. So these are just some of the main important laws that occurred for learning disability students. Parental rights. So the whole reason behind rights for the parent are there with the intent that the parent or parents will be involved at the stage of each of evaluation, the planning processes, the IEPs. They want parents to really, it's encouraged for them to be invited in and welcome, and that's why there are so many parent rights. Every parent must be given a copy of their rights. There are many, many, many important rights, but the book mentions 12 of them. Some of them require confidential treatment of their children's records, review and inspect the records. They have copies of all the records. I mean, this is all in terms of the sense that the parents are involved, of course. So the IDEA in Section 504, this is something pulled straight from the book. Its purpose, it has what its scope is, funding, all that type of thing. So this is one example of that. So parents as advocates. So it's common knowledge to say that parents of the child, of course, know the child the best. I mean, who wouldn't say that? When it comes to getting the services to help their children, though, they might not realize that they actually don't know what is the best for them. And that can be a very difficult thing for them. There are many, 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 many places for parents to go to for information. Something that the book says is the Learning Disabilities Association, with the website posted right there. It has a lot of information for parents when it comes to a lot of the educational processes and the legislation needed when it comes to learning disabilities. Of course, when there's parents' rights, there's also students' rights. There are many different rights that laws and courts and all of that have given to the students. They receive due process in the sense that if he or she gets into trouble at school, the student shall be aware of the known charges. They will be heard in defense of self, and they have the right to review all documents that support the charges. They are to be treated at all times with respect and courtesy by all members of the school staff, no matter what the situation. They expect a safe learning environment, and they should be provided accommodations that are listed for them. Now, with that, students are expected to not only treat their peers with common courtesy, but their teachers as well. They can't expect respect if they are not returning the favor. Teachers' rights and obligations. Everybody has rights here. Just like the student, the teacher has their own set. Just like the parent has their own set. Teachers have the right to work in a safe environment, same as the student does. They have the right to be treated respectfully by their students, same as the student. They have the right to be able to teach. Nobody has the right, so I like the phrase, teachers have the right to teach and students have the right to learn. So there should be nobody that should stop that from happening. Teachers have obligations to follow, guidelines to set forth that are listed in the IEP. Being a teacher, you have your own set of personal obligations, but when you're a special education teacher, there are an entire another set of obligations on top of the obligations you had already set for yourself. So this is a BIP, which is a behavior intervention plan. It's kind of blurry, I apologize. But this is an example of one straight from the book. There are many things that a child would get a BIP for, but there's many steps that lead up to that situation. So the IEP. The MET, it is the multidisciplinary evaluation team. They are part of the evaluation and reevaluation process to determine the eligibility for a special education student to get their services. It's a minimum of 2 people, and the report gets presented to the IEP team. The REED, the read or the review of existing evaluation data. It's a process where the IEP team takes reviews that exist in the existing evaluation data in order to make the evaluation decisions about a particular student. So the IEP team and other qualified professionals participate in this. The IEPT, or the Individualized Education Planning Team, a group of individuals that are responsible for developing, reviewing, or revising the IEP for a child. This group of people includes the principal, parent or guardian, psychologist, of course the special education teacher, and even a general education teacher. So an initial IEP. The IEP, or Individualized Education Program, it's an individualized set of objectives of a child who has been discovered for having a disability of some kind. It's intended to help the child reach their possible educational goals more easily, with accommodations and such, more easily than they typically would. It is tailored to the individual student, hence individualized, their individual needs, which are all identified in the evaluation process itself. The transition IEP. This is something that happens when they are 16 years old, and it's used to identify their goals, identify or develop their goals that should be accomplished during the current school year or years that will allow the student to meet their post-high school goals. So the entire portion of the IEP has a transition plan within it. The annual review IEP. The IEP gets reviewed and possibly revised annually or more often if needed. So it's the same meeting participants as the initial at the review meeting, the parent, student if it's appropriate, the special ed teacher, the general ed teacher, psychologist, all of that. They review a lot of data that was obtained by the child's special education teacher, so that you will see the academic level of achievement, the most recent evaluation data, the anticipated needs maybe, and other relevant information based on the child's education. So the reevaluation IEP is required to occur every 3 years, but it can happen sooner if it's needed. The local educational agencies and the parents can waive for the reevaluation to occur, so it can happen earlier. Manifest determination. It is a process that is there to determine if a child's problem behavior was or was not a manifestation of the child's disability. So it's completed as part of the IEP team meeting, and the IEP team must convene no later than 10 days when. So the parent requests such a meeting. The student is suspended for more than 10 cumulative days or more than 10 non-consecutive days. It's if exclusion or expulsion is being considered, things like that. Due process hearing. So due process hearing is one of the 3 main administrative remedies available to the student's parents. Hearings are there to resolve disagreements between parents and schools regarding their child or children with a disability. Many of the due process hearings are administrative hearings that are conducted in many ways, just like a court trial, possibly. Parents could file for a request for a hearing. This could be because the child's EEP is not being implemented in the way that it should be, and the parent is not liking what they are seeing. An addendum to the IEP is when changes are made. If new accommodations are being added, or even if something's being removed from the IEP, it is considered an addendum. This can be done, but it is required to have a parent signature, of course. And that is the IEP. And that is my learning disability screencast. Thank you.